Texas Tech has officially secured bowl eligibility with a 24-23 win over UCF. If you were excited about the Red Raiders going bowling, all I ask you to do is simply like the video. Listen, it wasn't pretty for some parts of the game, mainly that first quarter where it looked like UCF could run the score up on the Red Raiders. But Tim DeRuyter's crew made a drastic change defensively starting in the second quarter, and it paid huge dividends. Speaking of huge, that block by Duda Banks on the extra point was the main difference for the Red Raiders. Hey, how's it going, everybody? It's RC Maxfield here for the Back to 12 podcast, and we're going to recap that victory for Texas Tech to secure bowl eligibility for the Red Raiders and improve Joey McGuire's bunch to 7-1 in 8 November or December games under the second-year head coach. Listen, they struggled a little bit early on this year. There's no doubt about it. But it seems like, two creates a little bit of a trend here that Joey McGuire's teams really turn it on when November comes around. Again, like the video if you're excited about Texas Tech going bowling. We'll talk about everything in this game, starting with the defensive side. We'll have stats at the bottom of the screen. But I thought Tim DeRuyter made a drastic change in the second quarter. You go back and look at what UCF did in the first quarter, whether that with JRP, whether that was Harvey, it didn't matter. They kind of got whatever they wanted, it felt like, in the run game. You go look at what happened in the second quarter to the end of the game for the Red Raider defense, and you notice a pretty drastic change. Early on in the first, they had a spy, right? And we talked about this going into the game in terms of the preview, 3 keys to the game. You could not let UCF get outside the tackles. That's where they get a ton of chunk plays, right? Well, that's what UCF did in the first quarter. They had multiple chunk plays by Plumlee as well as Harvey. But after that, they made a sizable change to the Texas Tech defense where they had 2 linebackers and they almost had 2 spies, one individually for Harvey and then one for JRP, the quarterback for UCF. And that was a really interesting change for this defense because now your front can fortify the edges and you have a guy all the time focused on 2 of the biggest playmakers for the UCF Knights. And it worked wonders. It allowed the secondary to really free up and play a little bit more loose and not feel like, hey, we have to worry about X, Y, and Z when it comes to what's coming out of the UCF Knights backfield, right? Jacob Rodriguez was sensational in this one, led the Red Raiders in tackles. He will not play against Texas to maintain that red shirt, but he will get to play in a bowl game. So that's good, right? But he led the way for Texas Tech with 12 total tackles, 7 of them solo. He also had a pass breakup and a QB hurry. Neither team had a sack in this game, which kind of makes sense. I thought both offensive lines played pretty solid, but I also think that the Texas Tech defensive line really dictated things from the second quarter to the end of the game in terms of not allowing UCF to get outside of the tackles in the run game, not let JRP really show off those legs where he's best in terms of making those off-scripted throws and really just scrambling for those 7 or 8 yards that keeps UCF in front of the chains. Texas Tech did a phenomenal job with that. Now, the injury aspects come into this for Texas Tech defensively, where you look at this and now it's okay. Are you going to have Jalen Hutchings and are you going to have Rabbit against the number 7 Texas Longhorns? And Jalen Hutchings has a hurt knee. Joey McGuire mentioned in the post-game presser, they don't think it's an ACL. Remember, Jalen Hutchings has already had an ACL tear in his career. They hope he can play next week with a brace on if everything comes back clean in terms of the MRI. Now, Rabbit, he hurt his groin. You saw him on the stationary bike trying to get it loosened back up, but he did not play in the second half for the Red Raiders. He has a potential chance to play, according to Joey McGuire, next week, but they're going to see how things go throughout the week before they make anything official on that front. Now, before we switch into the Texas Tech offense, I want to hear from you guys. Give me your one word to describe the Texas Tech defense against UCF. Again, first quarter, it looked like things could get ugly, but Tim DeRuyter really made a sizable change, specifically with the linebackers for Texas Tech, to allow Texas Tech to not allow UCF on the outside of the boundaries, outside of the hashes, outside the numbers, where they are best in terms of getting chunk plays. So let me know your one word to describe the Texas Tech defense versus UCF. All right, let's move to the offense. And again, I'll run through some of these offensive numbers before we get to what stood out for me. Baron Morton was 21 of 35, a 60% completion percentage, 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. The leading receiver in this one was Dre McCray for the Red Raiders. He had 4 catches for 55 yards and a tutty. He was tied in target leader wise alongside Koy Aiken. No surprise there. I thought Jordan Brown also had really, really impactful plays for the Red Raiders. It's not going to show up a ton in the score sheet, or in the stat sheet, I should say. He only had 4 catches for 30 yards, but I thought he made some pretty big blocks on the outside to keep things going for Texas Tech in the run game, and also had a couple of catches that were pivotal in sustaining drives for the Red Raiders. Talking about that run game, it all runs through Taj Brooks. You did not see anybody else in terms of the Texas Tech running backs get a carry in this game. No Cameron Valdez, no Nehemiah Martinez in terms of running back carries. It was strictly Taj Brooks. He got all 24 of the touches for 182 yards, 1 touchdown, had a long run of 46 yards, and averaged 7.6 yards per carry. Other things that stood out to me when it came to the Texas Tech offense, we talked about how the Texas Tech defensive line had to contain UCF and really win that battle in the trenches. Well, you flip that and you talk about the Texas Tech offensive line. I thought they did a really good job against this UCF front. And you have to remember this. On a lot of these plays, UCF had a stacked box, whether that was 6, maybe even 7 guys in the box at times, right? Texas Tech had to pass a little bit, but they allowed 0 sacks, minimal hurries in this one. And I thought they did a really good job of allowing Baron Morton to really survey the field and do what he does best in terms of those outside throws, where he really did a solid job. I mean, he missed a couple. There was a couple of drops as well. But overall, I thought this was a solid game for Baron Morton with room for improvement in certain aspects in terms of a couple of throws across the middle where he was behind the wide receiver, especially on that INT throw. Now, Taj Brooks, again, another great game, right? 7.6 yards a carry. It's hard to fault that at all. There really is no faulting it. And he scored a 7th straight touchdown, or had a 7th straight game with a touchdown, I should say. Again, 24 carries, 182 yards, and a TD for the Red Raider running back. He was sensational, right? Another thing that stood out to me with Morton, and a way of thinking for me, that he felt good on Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening, whatever you want to call it, at the Jones. He looked good throwing the deep ball. Now, did he connect at a high rate at it? No, most quarterbacks aren't, right? But he had 131 yards on throws, 15-plus yards down the field, and he was 5 for 10. I thought it really allowed Texas Tech to open things up in the run game, where the UCF secondary had to think, okay, they are going to take some deep shots here, right? So that takes one extra guy out of the box. And what does that do? Makes Zach Kittley feel a lot more comfortable with running Taj Brooks, specifically in the second half and when they were trying to run the clock out. I thought they did a phenomenal job on that front. Now, I get people are upset that Taj did not get more carries early on. I believe he had 6, maybe 7 in the first half, but he was sensational in the second half, and you had to take what the defense was giving you if you were Zach Kittley, right? And you were in the game. It was 14-14. You did a good job of getting back, specifically in that second quarter, to tie it up at half. And then in the second half, you showed out a little bit if you were Zach Kittley, in terms of, I thought he went in his bag a couple times, right? Specifically in the run game, running a couple of sets that really opened things up for Taj Brooks to get some spacing, even when the box was stacked. You can't do that all the time because defenses will make adjustments, but the secondary really started to collapse. Taj Brooks made a couple guys miss, like he does better than anybody in college football. That allowed Texas Tech to pick up a 2nd and 3rd down where they really needed it in terms of sustaining a drive to run out the clock in the pass game. So I thought Zach Kittley was pretty solid. All in all, a guy that I've been critical of this year, I thought he was solid against UCF. And in the end, the biggest takeaway from this game, Texas Tech Red Raiders are going to be bowl eligible. And that's big. I understand from a standpoint this may be disappointing in terms of the preseason expectation, but this bowl game is critical for the Red Raiders to get those extra practices for guys that are going to have more pivotal roles next season, because you're losing a ton of guys. You're losing, Tony Bradford. You're losing Jalen Hutchins, right? You're losing more guys in the secondary like Rabbit. You're losing Malik Dunlap. You're losing Rashad Williams. You're losing guys like that on defense. Not to mention on offense, you're probably losing Taj Brooks, right? You get guys to get more practice reps in bigger situations. And now you got to remember too, all your red shirts can play. This doesn't count against the red shirt. Okay. So Jacob Rodriguez is going to get another game, right? This will be his 5th of the year. And then you'll also get other red shirts where it's like, hey, we're going to see what you have. Remember last year when you had Smith come out and he had a huge game, right? The 6'6" behemoth outside linebacker, for Texas Tech, had a huge game against Ole Miss. Now, he obviously has missed this season with a knee injury, but you're going to have guys like that in bigger situations now, and you get them in game snaps, and that's huge for next season when Texas Tech is really going to have to replace quite a few guys on both sides of the football. So again, if you're excited about Texas Tech making a bowl game, simply like the video. That's all I ask you to do on this one. I'm RC Maxfield one more time. Texas Tech beats UCF 24-23. And if you want to stay in the know on Texas Tech football all year long, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button, and while you're at it, you might as well hit that notification bell to stay in the know on Texas Tech football all year long right here on the Back to 12 podcast channel.